Y'all know what it is.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is the founder and CEO of FE International, Thomas Smale. FE International is a leading mergers and acquisitions firm dedicated to helping software and tech companies get maximum value from the sale of their business. Thomas founded FE International in 2010 with the aim of helping entrepreneurs running self-funded and profitable businesses exit. Since then, Thomas has built FE into an industry-leading M&A advisory for $1 to $100 million technology businesses. With experience dating back to the early 2000s, Thomas offers invaluable technical, diligence, and negotiation advice to early-stage and seasoned business owners alike. This has resulted in more than 1,200 successful exits and more than $1 billion in lifetime acquisitions. Joining us today for a conversation about the factors that make a business attractive to buyers, the hurdles that entrepreneurs encounter when looking to scale their business, how business owners can position themselves for an acquisition, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Thomas Smale. Hey, Thomas, how are you, man?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you here and really looking forward to this conversation. We've, over the years, have had one or two companies come on and talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions, especially the buying and selling of small tech companies and things like that. But your experience, I think, is unique in just sort of the breadth of it, how long you've been at it, and also sort of the ups and downs that you've been through over the course of your career. So I wonder if we could start a little bit just kind of at the beginning. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and how you got into this line of work.
For sure. Yeah. So I started FE International in 2010. At the time, I was in my final year of college. For those of you who remember that far back in time, the economy was not in particularly good shape. So I did a business degree. Lots of people that I went to college with were looking to go work for investment banks. And at the time, quite a few of the investment banks were rescinding job offers to new graduates. So I figured if there's ever a time to try and start a business, it was now. So like in 2010, as you mentioned, from the early 2000s, I'd spent probably most of college trying to make some extra cash on the side. I think like many students do, buying and selling domain names. So at the time, nothing to do with really developed websites. I was just buying either very simple websites or very simple domains. Didn't really have any money like most students. So it was put $100 on your credit card, buy a small website, buy a domain, fix it up a bit, make some changes to it, sell it at the end of the month, pay off the credit card bill and repeat. So it'd usually be $100 into 500, 500 into 1,000, 1,000 into 2,000, kind of compounded from there. Given I was graduating, I needed to make some more money than a couple of $100 a month. So at the time, I wrote a book about buying and selling websites and domains. It was quite simple. I was selling it for $97. It included various other things like a kind of members forum, some coaching, one-on-one, all of that kind of stuff. So at the time, and it took off, it did quite well for a while in 2010. I figured that the entire business would be essentially teaching people how to buy and sell businesses and then just coaching. And I could just do that into perpetuity. What I found was that people who read the book and did the course, it attracted some bigger business owners who came to me and said, "Hey, Thomas, I read your book. Seems like the concepts you've applied to selling a business for $1,000 or $2,000 could be applied to a bigger business. Can you help me sell my business for me?" Because at the time, if you go back to 2010, there was no, if you wanted to find an FE International for your business model, like a SaaS business, an e-commerce business, a content-based business in the like below $100 million valuation range, there wasn't really anyone you could call. Maybe a couple of really small businesses. You couldn't call a big investment bank because they only wanted bigger deals. So kind of at the time fell into it by accident, then started helping people sell. I was doing it for them. And then word of mouth really grew from there. I think I laugh looking back and people don't really believe it. When people ask me like, oh, like how much time do I need to spend on my website or my branding before I launch? we didn't have a website for years. We just 100% word of mouth. People would email me and be like, "Hey, Thomas, I want to sell my business." So did that for a couple of years. We hit 2012. And then my current business partner, who I went to college with actually, and had gone to work in investment banking for a couple of years, came to join me at FE. And he looked at everything we were doing. And he was like, "Thomas, why are you wasting your time doing coaching, selling books and stuff like that when 95% of your revenue is coming from M&A?" So from then on, so I guess for the last 10 years, we spent all of our time just focusing on that. We have a couple of other revenue sources as well, but primarily we just help sellers sell their business. And we've really compounded from there. Now we have an office in New York, we have an office in Miami, London, San Francisco, where I'm based. We have a team all over. Across everything we do, the team is well over 100 people now. Not necessarily all in the M&A business, but I think I'm an entrepreneur like everyone else, so I don't just run FE. We have other things going on too. So that's where we are today. And I'd say if you look at the market today, so if you're looking to sell a business in 2022, you're fortunate that there are lots of options for you out there. But I like to think we at least help pave the way for kind of the new generation of entrepreneurs by kind of actually getting deals done, helping people, and really creating a kind of a market that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said. I know a lot of people sort of discount, being an older organization, and like maybe they even question, your ability to know what's happening in today's market. But what I think is actually interesting is, in 2010, when you were just getting started, like things were tough. Like that wasn't like a prime time to start that kind of business, right? Or start doing that kind of.
It was objectively, it was a terrible time because
right.
No one
and and I don't know exactly what the future has to hold, but like I imagine there's going to be some tumultuous times in the near future. And I mean, for me, if I was looking for somebody to help sell my business, like I think right now I would be really leaning into people with experience dealing in recession and dealing with, ups and downs of markets and that kind of thing. So I mean, honestly, your longevity will probably serve you well, or at least in my mind, it seems like it should.
Yeah, for sure. And the nature of a service business like we have is it's really the compounding effect of reputation. And that's not something, if you raised $100 million tomorrow, you couldn't come in and suddenly disrupt our business because you can't buy the reputation. Yes, you could make an acquisition and buy a similar business. You can't do that overnight. You could buy ads literally everywhere. You take out every billboard in every big city in the US and get the brand awareness, but you still can't buy that reputation. So in my mind, we always have that moat of reputation. And also we've sold businesses for over 1,200 clients. As you guys, I'm sure know, entrepreneurs like to talk, whether in public or in private, and they like to share their wins and their losses. So when people sell their business, they will share that with other entrepreneurs they know. And that's very defensible. Nothing can ever take those deals away from us. So I personally sleep quite well at night thinking the business will be sustainable long term. And then to your other point, if you just look at the industry long term, every single kid coming out of college these days is building an app or some form of technology business. 12 years ago, that was to some extent the case, but not what everyone was doing. But now literally every kid that graduates who wants to be an entrepreneur, that's what they're doing. So for the next 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, the new breed of entrepreneurs are going to be building the kind of businesses we sell.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that it's reputational, like if you can build your advertising based on referrals instead of, just the big billboards and this and that, like you said, the referral is 100% of the deal. It goes so much further than just someone that you cold called or this or that. If someone's saying, "Hey, contact Thomas, he does a good job. I've worked with him. He got X amount of dollars profit for my business, this and that," that's going to go a lot further than some flyer in the mail. You know what I mean? It just does. So
absolutely. And also reduces other expenses within the business. So you don't need a very big sales team if from a sales side perspective, like bringing on new clients, if essentially it's already been pre-sold by the person referring us. So there are many other advantages as well. I think the biggest challenge of it, the disadvantage of being largely referral driven, is it's quite hard to scale exponentially. If we wanted to 4x next year, we need more sources of clients, which we do have anyway. We need more sources of clients than just referrals, because it's quite hard to suddenly get 4 times the number of referrals, particularly given entrepreneurs tend to talk to other entrepreneurs in quite a organic way. I couldn't suddenly get all of our last 1,200 clients and get them each on stage at the biggest event in their sub industry to talk about how they sold their business with FE. That just wouldn't really work, as much as it would be great if it could.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's take a trip back in time to that first kind of client that you helped. It's one thing to buy a domain and a website and flip it for, $500-600. It's another thing to get someone reaching out and saying, hey, can you sell my business? And then figuring out how to do it and finding the right buyer. I'm sure you've learned a lot over the years, but maybe tell us about that first, transaction, and then how it led into the next and the next and the next, and a few things you learned over the way.
Yeah. So I think before I go into that, I think the thing I've learned is that once you figure out how to do something, generally speaking, you can apply that to a bigger and bigger version of that same thing. And the concepts are still largely the same. So if you can sell something for $50, you can sell something for 5,000, you can sell something for 500,000, you can sell it for 50 million. There may be some differences along the way. I'd be lying if I said it's just as easy to sell a $50 million business as it is a $5,000 business. But a lot of the concepts, at least at like a simple level, are the same. So first deal, it was about a $20,000 business. So not as big as the businesses we sell today, but back then having no life overheads, essentially, I think I got paid 10% at the time of that $2,000 for a student just graduating. At least for me, living in the UK, that was a lot of money. That was like a couple of months of rent. I could live off that for a while. But essentially, I was just applying what I already knew. At the time, I was generally buying and selling on third-party marketplaces, I would find. And the premise of what I was doing, turning 100 into 500, was generally just presenting the business I'd bought or the website I'd bought in a clear way. So that's all I was doing when I started selling businesses. It was just presenting it clearly, like financials, explaining the business, a little bit about the owner, which if you look at what we do today is really very similar, just in a much more sophisticated way. We now don't use marketplaces. We have our own network of acquirers and people we reach out to, but essentially it's presenting the business in a clear way so a potential buyer can understand what they're buying, and then get as many eyes on the business as possible. So you get multiple bids, you can get the highest price and highest valuation possible. So that's really what I did. I kind of applied what I'd already learned. Very similar processes. Selling something for 20,000 was very similar to selling something for 1,000. From there, what I found, so back then, people don't really use forums these days. Now it's all social media. Back in 2010, everyone was on web forums. You could find a forum for basically anything you could think up, which I guess is very similar to like Facebook groups today. So back then, the person I sold his business for, he then went and posted about it. And at the time, it was really uncommon to sell a small business of that size. So I think all he said was along the lines of, I sold my business for $20,000. Here's what I did. Message Thomas. And then it was very much word of mouth from there. Like I said, I wasn't advertising. I don't even think I told people at the time I was doing it. And it was really just me. And then started building out a small team. Like I said, my current business partner joined in 2012 and it compounded from there. But for the first 2 years of the business, it was 100% word of mouth, past clients talking about what they've done. Since then, our marketing is now a little bit more sophisticated, but essentially it's always been focused on like the clients and their success rather than why we're amazing. I've always found people talking about their own success is much more credible than you talking about yourself.
Yeah. Can I ask what you went to college for?
I did business administration. I'm not sure what the US version of that is, but I'm assuming it's probably saying very similar.
Yeah. It'd be funny if you went to college for like, I don't know, English major or something like that, and you got into business, selling businesses, and it wasn't really on, like the forefront of something you got into. You just happened to be good at it, and it developed into a full career. That to me always is just when stuff like that happens, it always makes me think like, man, that's a left turn that changed his entire career trajectory and got him into something different. So when that happens, I always try to see if it did happen like that. So,
Yeah, I would say though, doing again, my own experience is the university I went to, or the college I went to in England. What you learn in a business degree isn't really what you apply running a business. They're kind of teaching you how to be a good employee in a 10,000 person organization, how to do write a business plan. I think the reality of most successful entrepreneurs is they probably didn't get to where they are spending their first 6 months writing a business plan. Yes, maybe there are some exceptions. So I think on paper, it doesn't sound like much of a pivot, go from doing a business degree to running a business. But I think the reality is 99% of the things I've learned running a business are from my own experience, not from kind of formal education.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I wanted to ask you, so a lot of people go into business, they're chasing a passion or they have something they love and they start a company. And maybe I just roll in the wrong circles, but it seems like most of the business people I own don't necessarily start their business with the idea of exiting it. I do know some, that are like private equity and stuff like that, that's the whole purpose is, buy a company, flip it and sell it. But for your average entrepreneur, your person just getting started in a business or something, most people, will follow their trade or follow their passion and start a little business. So then time goes by and these people get older and they start looking at retirement and things like that. And now they want to sell. So I wonder if you could take us a little bit through the process of how to, I guess, basically, decide that our business is sellable for one, and then two, maybe help us understand the steps that we need to be taking to sell the business, especially maybe through the lens of the entrepreneur that didn't start with the end in mind.
Yeah, for sure. So beginning to a little bit more now, and pre-COVID, I would spend a lot of time speaking at conferences on stage. And generally speaking, you're speaking to a room full of business owners, generally in the tech space. They'd be relevant to the kind of businesses we would sell. And you would say, if you surveyed, say there's 1,000 people in the room and you surveyed every single one of them, and before you started and said, how many of you are thinking about selling a business in the next 3 months? You might get one person out of the entire 1,000 who says yes. And then if you say how many of you are thinking about selling at one stage, to your point, you might get 100. And then the other 900 would say, no, I'm never selling, no intention of selling at all. So one of the first things I talk to people about is, regardless of what your future plan is with your business, you should always put things in place to make sure it is sellable if you ever need to sell, regardless of whether or not you're actually planning to do it or not. And the main reason for that is you ultimately never really know how circumstances will change. A lot of people think in a very binary way, I'm never going to sell, but that's based on their current life situation and what's going on. You have no idea what will happen in the future, personally or professionally. Often a lot of people we work with sell not because they're bored, it's because another business opportunity came along and they're more passionate about it. They find it more interesting. Maybe it's growing faster than the business they have. So they want to sell not because their business is bad, but because they've got another opportunity. But if you ask them before that new opportunity came along, they'll say, no, I like this business and this is the one I want to run. So I think the first thing you really need to do if you're ever thinking about selling a business is just realize that regardless of what your mindset is, you should at least plan to sell at some stage and be in a position where you can. And that's really most of the battle. I could give you checklists and checklists, pages and pages of best practices you should do before you sell, but you need to at least think about being in a position where you can. And that's the first part.
So what are some broad overviews of critical, these have to be in place or else you can't sell the business? I'm assuming, having a good accounting with profit and loss and all that stuff is very important, but are there other things that are also important?
So fundamentally, at least my philosophy is almost any business is sellable. As to whether or not you get a good valuation or not, that's a slightly different question, but every business can be sold. more or less. The very first thing you do, I mean, I used to speak to a lot of crowds full of people with $10 million a year businesses, or a lot of people just starting out. My advice to people starting out was always fundamentally, you've got to be making money. Buyers care about revenue, and more so, particularly when markets get challenging from a macroeconomic position. So here we are in middle of 2022, coming into a potential recession in the US. Some other countries around the world, it looks like it might get tricky for a couple of years. Buyers are getting more conscious about cash flow and profitability. So years ago, you might have got away with selling a business that wasn't profitable for a significant premium. That's going to get a lot more difficult. So making money, being profitable is number one if you want to build a sellable business. If you have a business that's profitable, there's almost no scenario where that business is not sellable. Number two, which you already mentioned, is getting your P&L or your income statement, whatever you want to call it, in good order. You don't necessarily need to have an accountant, although I think for almost all businesses, I would suggest you at least hire someone to help you with filing your taxes, but they very least need to be organized. Even if it's literally just a case of copying your numbers into an Excel sheet every month, that's better than 90% of business owners who don't really do anything. What a lot of people tend to do is just send all their receipts and invoices to their accountant at the end of the year. The accountant adds it all up and says, okay, you made $500,000 revenue, spent $400,000, you have $100,000 profit, you have an LLC, we'll distribute all that money to you personally, and then you pay tax on the $100,000. So in really simple terms, if you can at the very least track your monthly profit and loss, that's a good start. If the next thing, this is probably the second most important thing that would make a business potentially unsellable. So it's profitable, you have your numbers in good order. The next thing is removing the reliance on yourself or other business owners.
I was going to bring that up because I'm kind of in a position right now where my business is 100% based off of me. If I pull myself out of the business, it doesn't make money. And that's basically because as a DJ, they're hiring me for my talent to come in and do what I do. And so I can't really throw, another clone of me out there that doesn't have the talent, doesn't have the skill set behind me to, sell my business and move on to something else. So I think that's kind of like critical to think of, because I have another friend who runs a DJ business, but he does a multi-op scenario. He's got multiple employees, he does multiple gigs each night, and it's more of a business model instead of solely reliant on me. And I actually made a conscious decision to pull myself out of that business because I didn't like the headache. I didn't like having someone that I didn't trust going out and representing a client and have the potential to ruin it, this and that. I just I marketed myself more as a high dollar entertainer, and you're paying for me. And I knew that when I went into it, that I wasn't necessarily starting a business to sell. I started this, or I switched to this role to alleviate headache and the pressures that come with having employees. So that was conscious on my end. I don't ever have any plans on selling my equipment or my business brand name or anything like that. So that was a conscious decision, but I'm sure other people don't necessarily think of that going into it, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the relevant thing there is there's nothing wrong if you have a high demand skill. There's nothing wrong with essentially selling that skill for as much money as you can possibly make. You can still make a sellable business out of that by leveraging the cash you're making and reinvesting it combined with your skill into building something that can be sold. So, for example, in the DJ space, we've seen a business like teaching people how to be a DJ. So you could build a video course or a book about being a DJ. Maybe you'll be in some of those videos, maybe have some DJ friends or whatever you can hire or pay or swap things with to help make some videos. And then essentially you can leverage your reputation, everything you know, but you have a sellable business, because that whole thing is not built around you.
Yeah.
It's going to be almost impossible to sell you the DJ because there's no real way that could possibly be done. But there's no reason why you can't leverage the skills, the cash, resources, all the other things you have into building a business that can be sold. So that's why it's important to think about it early, because to the earlier point, a lot of people don't think about selling at all, or do think about it and just like kind of give up and say, actually, I can't ever sell. Therefore, I'm not even going to bother thinking about it. But if you're in a position where you're making money and you have kind of the ability to either spend time or buy time to create something, there's no reason why you can't make a sellable business in quite short amount of time.
I wonder, would you just sort of add on to that with your own experience? And the reason I ask is, so I also work in a service industry. I've got a marketing advertising agency, but I'm sort of the principal creative behind it, right? And we outsource a lot, and we have, freelance resources and things like that we leverage with regularity. But ultimately, most of our clients come to work with us because of me, some relationship they have with me. And I imagine early on at FE, it was probably the same for you, where you were sort of the principal and you were the one who now needed to build systems up around yourself to expand. But I wondered if you could talk about that scaling just from like a one-man operation to like a 5-person operation to a 100-person operation. Like, how does this trajectory work for you?
Yeah, so that is a really good point as well. One solution in a business built around yourself is just hire people and get to the stage where if I looked at selling FE, the business, when we were a team of 5, it was very much me doing everything. Probably wouldn't have been sellable, would have been very difficult because I was essentially selling myself. If we sold tomorrow, yes, I'm still actively involved. I'm still CEO of the business. But the level we're at now, I pay myself a fair market salary. We could hire another CEO from the industry who would know just as much about me as investment banking or M&A at the level we do it. We could bring them in, could train them on almost everything I do and sell the business. So, but to get there, it does require a couple of stages. I think personally, and there's lots of different ways to look at this. You said like 5 employees. I think the first tipping point is probably about 20 people. And then, so it's the first person you hire, and then 20 people. And then I think about 100 people, it gets different again. So the first person you hire is, I think, the most difficult, because what a lot of people don't realize until they've hired someone for the first time is you can no longer make selfish decisions in your business because you're committing to that person. And you can't just decide, oh, I don't feel like working today or making any money, or maybe I'm going to go on vacation for 6 months. You have to actually be there and manage that person, particularly if you're hiring someone particularly if you're hiring a full-time employee. Maybe they have a mortgage, maybe they have a husband or a wife, maybe they have kids, but they have financial commitments and they're essentially relying on you and your business. So the first employee you hire is not one to take lightly, because that's a really big commitment. You're essentially making not necessarily a commitment for life, because people can leave at any time. But that is a big one. And then I'd say employee number 2 to 20 is a very similar journey. It's kind of hiring more. Once you get to 20, you'll probably start to have a couple of managers internally who have either stepped up or started to do things proactively. Once you get to 20, I think it starts to get quite difficult, and you need to pivot again to get to 100. You'll start having people will start quitting. People will start caring about culture, values, all of those kind of things. When you have 5 people, you don't really need any cultural values. Most companies just kind of at that level tend to be quite flexible, quite chilled out. You don't really need any HR rules in place because people aren't leaving, people aren't messing around with vacation time or whatever it might be. So when you get to 20, you need to start having policies. You probably need to hire your first HR person. You probably need to start hiring people who don't directly actually generate any revenue. Whereas the first 5 people you're hiring are going to be people who directly generate revenue. It's highly unlikely it's the first hire you make an HR manager, the second person you hire an office manager, and the third person you hire an assistant for yourself. You're probably going to be hiring a marketing manager, a salesperson, an engineer, and another salesperson. To get into 20 is, I think, is very difficult. That's the tough part. You'll have to start putting policies in place. You have to start putting managers in place. You'll get to the stage where, at least if you're anything like me, you probably have all 20 of those people informally reporting into you. And what you'll find is it's basically impossible. You can't have 20 people reporting into you. People will quit and they'll say, hey, Thomas sucks. He's never available. He never replies to me. But he doesn't do a one-on-one because he's too busy dealing with 18 or 19 other people. So the thing I then learned going from 20 to over 100, I think actually we're more like 140 now, is you have to then focus on building managers and giving them the ability to manage their team and making them ultimately manage their team. So you can then scale essentially quite quickly because they're then responsible for hiring within their team. And you probably have someone to help with hiring and HR. They're responsible for their team retention. Yes, you can, as CEO or founder, you can set policies to help grow the company and help retain the team, but ultimately it's on the managers. People very rarely quit companies they don't like. They quit managers they don't like. So if the managers are doing a good job, then people will stay. If the managers are not doing a good job, people will leave. And that doesn't really change. So what I've spent these couple of years doing as the team has expanded is I spend pretty significant amount of my time just with my direct reports, either in one-on-ones or whatever. And my job as CEO is just to help them and make sure they have the resources they need or kind of input they need to succeed in their role. I'm not necessarily managing them as such. I'm not kind of following up on them all day long, asking what they're doing or like what time they turned up to the office today or anything like that. It's really kind of just helping them do their job properly and being able to trust them. And that will really kind of ultimately help you scale. You need the team to kind of do it for you. But you do have to set very clear goals and kind of targets. So the team know what I care about and they know what I don't care about and what I don't need to review or what I don't need to see. And there are some things which I think are very important to revenue or leads or whatever an important metric for us might be. So they're the kind of things we focus our time on. So yeah, I think they're the three main stages. I haven't gone beyond that, but the first person is really big because ultimately you're taking responsibility probably for the first time in your life for someone else's life and career, and they're trusting you. First 20 is then kind of a little bit of hustle, like figuring out as you go along. You probably won't really have any policies. There'll be no training when people join. There'll probably be no HR. There'll be no culture, none of that stuff. Once you go beyond that, you'll start to solidify it all. And you spend most of your time essentially mentoring managers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to ask you too, just briefly about that first hire. How do you know what you need or who you need? So now, granted, I mean, you mentioned some job titles, marketing manager, things like this, that might be the types of revenue generators you bring in. But I wondered, just again, given your expertise, maybe you have an answer to this. When you're the individual that starts a business, typically speaking, you're the person wearing many hats, right? You're doing a lot of stuff. So how do you prioritize what of your skills you're trying to replace with a new hire? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think so. The way I approached it, and I think there are many different ways to approach it, is I've always tried to focus on doing the things I'm good at and not doing the things I'm not good at. I think a lot of people try to do the opposite. They spend all of their time trying to figure out how to improve their weaknesses. So for example, I'm not an accountant. And yes, I understand the basics of accounting, but I do not spend my time sitting up until midnight every night reading books on accounting, trying to learn accounting. I just hired an accountant and a finance team, and they kind of tell me what's going on and we review numbers together, and that all makes sense to me. So the first hire I made, and almost all the hires I've ever made since, have really been filling gaps of weaknesses that I can not do myself. And that's either things that I was doing and doing badly or wasn't doing and needed to do. And generally, they're going to be quite obvious earlier in your business. I say for most people, they're going to be either some sort of marketing role or admin role, particularly if you're like the chief salesperson, you're delivering your service, you probably need some sort of back end help. In almost all businesses, and this definitely does not need to be a full-time hire early on, but you need someone responsible for finance or helping with finance, and then go from there. So I would always say focus on your strengths, develop your strengths, and hire people that are good at your weaknesses. You can hire, I don't like accounting. There are many, many people out there who love accounting and that's all they want to do all day long. So hire those people and focus on, in my case, not accounting.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's good advice.
That makes complete sense too. I was wondering, we've kind of talked about the person who's starting a business and trying to sell it, but let's switch ends because there's two people you have to deal with in your role. You have to deal with the person selling and you have to deal with the person buying. What do you look for in a potential candidate or someone who's going to be buying a business, and how do you go about finding them?
Yeah, so the first thing for us is really deferring to what the seller's looking for. So most people assume that the average seller wants to just get as much money as possible for their business and they don't really care about everything else. While to an extent that is true, the vast majority of sellers are also looking for someone that they like and someone they think will do a good job with the business, either running it or with the existing team. Some people, if they're particularly attached to their business, might really care about their legacy or whatever you want to call it. And they want to make sure that whoever buys the business is going to be a good steward. So one of the things we do up front as we're onboarding a client, and our client is always the seller, or the vast majority of the time they're the seller anyway, we'll be establishing with them what their goals are, what they're looking for in a buyer. Are they looking for someone who can come in, is really experienced in the space, has done other acquisitions, can take over and be running the business within a couple of days and doesn't need any training or help? Or are they happy dealing with a first-time buyer who doesn't entirely know what they're doing and maybe they need a little bit more training than a more experienced buyer? But the flip side is they're willing to pay a little bit more for that because of the fact they need more hand-holding. So once we've established that, and there's no, as a seller, there's no right or wrong answer to that question. Some people just say, hey, get me as much money as possible. Some people want some form of balance between kind of best price possible, but also a buyer that they like. From there, we then run a multi-stage process of targeting buyers. So part of it is buyers who are already in our existing network, and then we've segmented them within our CRM. So we'll reach out to people who happy to work a certain number of hours, have a certain amount of money, want a certain business model. That's a pretty good way to narrow it down to start. And then we also put a huge amount of time and resource into actual outreach to potential buyers based on what the seller's looking for. So that might be reaching out to companies who have bought similar businesses in the past. It might be reaching out to private equity firms who have got a portfolio that's similar. It might be reaching out to accounting firms or law firms or other investment banks who have worked on similar deals before to see if they might have buyers that are interested in the business. And then we really go from there. So we try to get many buyers as possible as we can in the funnel that fit the criteria of what the seller's looking for. And then we really leave it down to the seller to make a decision with our advice as well, of course, as to who they think is a good fit and who they want to work with. Obviously, once we've got bids and offers on the table. But yeah, it's very much personal decision on the side of the seller. There's no right or wrong answer. But I'd say the average person hiring an M&A firm like FE International is looking to maximize value. If they just wanted to sell to the best fit would probably be their friend or family member or someone they already know.
Right.
So I'm assuming you guys kind of stick to a certain type of business. You don't really go after brick and mortar or this or that. You're mainly, it's the software as a service kind of thing, a SaaS business, right? Is that what you guys focus on for the most part?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we would generically describe it as technology businesses, but it's generally software or software as a service businesses, e-commerce businesses, content businesses. So that might be a blog, it might be a digital course or a digital service. generally anything that falls within those main business models. But one thing I've learned as well is like, we know what we're good at and we know what we're not good at. If you ask me to sell a restaurant, I could probably figure it out, but you definitely should not hire me to sell a restaurant, and we would say no to it. We're very much focused on what we're good at.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think it backs up what you were saying earlier too. So can we talk a little bit more? You already, I guess, sort of with Mike's last question, sort of went through a little bit of the introductory parts, or maybe 30,000 foot view of the sales process. But do you mind sort of walking us through the process of an acquisition? Just sort of, I mean, for anybody who might be, trying to sell off a business, or maybe they want to sell one off one day, they don't have a lot of experience in this or anything. Can you just sort of describe how the process works?
Yeah. So if you look at it from a seller perspective, and my caveat here is this is FE's process. Every M&A firm you speak to will have a slightly different process. If you try sell yourself, you can essentially make up any process you want. But this is our process from a seller perspective. So the very first thing we do, assuming you are interested in figuring out what your business is worth, we start with evaluation. So that's a free service we offer to anyone to establish what we think their business is worth and if it's a good fit and the kind of business we want to take on. So to Mike's question, if you come to us with a restaurant, we're not going to help you. We know from day one it's not a fit. We're not going to waste your time. So it's essentially an element of scoping for us to make sure it's a good fit. And exactly the same for sellers. They'll get to learn a little bit about our process, whether they like us, whether they think we're credible, whether they think we know what we're doing, whether they like the way we're going to run things. Once we've done that, that will often then turn into a multi-month or multi-year process of then giving essentially more free advice, getting a seller to a stage where they are ready to sell. So we might say, hey, actually, you can't sell right now. Here's 3 things you need to go fix. Come back to us when you've done them. Or it might be, hey, currently your business is worth $5 million. The seller wants 10 million. So they need to go away and do some things until their business is worth a little bit more. But once we've got through those stages, or maybe they're ready to sell straight away, which is obviously some people, we then go through, and this is, I think, quite unique in the industry. Most firms don't do this at all. They kind of skip this stage. We then have what we call an audit process, which is primarily a team of accountants doing due diligence on your business before we list it and go out to buyers. So we're going through your accounts, we're working through with your accountant, or if you don't have an accountant, we're working with you to make sure that the numbers you claim are accurate. Because obviously the most important thing with buyers is making sure if someone says their business is making $1 million a year and they're spending $500,000 a year, that you can verify that and it's accurate. And in my experience, the vast majority of business owners, either intentionally or not, will overstate how much they are making. They'll either forget about costs or hide costs. So that's why we have an entire audit team. And that's why I don't know what time buyers trust us. While we obviously don't guarantee the businesses we're selling, there's significantly more verification happening than if someone's buying from a marketplace where it's just using the seller's claim numbers, or smaller business brokers and M&A firms who essentially just take the seller's word for it, or a seller trying to sell directly, where again, they can kind of just make it up as they go along. So we go through that process. We call it...
Oh, sorry. I think we're all trying to interrupt. I think we all have a question there. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to reinforce that fact, that the fact that you do that audit and the fact that you take that extra step, it ensures that I'm sure that in this industry, a lot of the people that are buying and working with you are going to be future buyers as well. And so if you burn that bridge and you sell them a business that hasn't been necessarily gone through the audit process and isn't necessarily up to what it's claiming, and they buy it and have a bad experience, the likelihood of them coming back and buying from you a second time or buying a second business or third business is very slim. So that's probably the fact that you do that probably generates more traffic for your business. So
for sure. And to the earlier point about reputation over time, it helps build a reputation because you get a reputation for doing a good job.
Yeah. I just wanted to pause our process discussion also and just see if I could get you to maybe drill a little deeper on due diligence. I know that this is something, I mean, you hear all the horror stories of the people who didn't do proper due diligence. You've obviously, we just had you were talking about the financial aspects of due diligence, but are there other components of due diligence that a small business owner or somebody interested in purchasing a business ought to be looking at besides strictly financials?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say there's two parts of due diligence. There's our due diligence, which is really verifying a business owner is telling the truth in what they tell us. What we're not doing, I mean, there's an element of it, but what we're not doing is saying to a buyer, you should buy this business. Everything is perfect. Take everyone's word for it and go ahead. So we're just verifying. As a buyer, you want to make sure that firstly, everything is accurate, but also it's a good fit for you based on how it's been presented. But beyond just accounting due diligence, there's also an element of legal due diligence. So do you own the business? Do you own the source code? Do you own the IP? Do you own the DJ videos in Mike's new course business he's going to launch after this podcast? Whatever that might be. So legal, again, that all that stuff is kind of obvious what's in there. Operational due diligence. So in Mike's business, if he tells us he's working 5 hours a week, but we see on Instagram he's out DJing every night, then we know that the 5 hours a week claim is probably not accurate. So we do things like that. We'll establish based on, sometimes it's kind of obvious, like, oh, I'm working 5 hours a week, but the reality is every single day we know they're sending emails to the team, answering support tickets and writing code. That's probably not correct. So operational due diligence, lots of things that go into that, but it's establishing what the seller says is accurate. That doesn't, what we're not verifying is whether or not the business is well run. Like the business owner might not be a very good business owner. They might be disorganized. They might not have processes, whatever it might be. But that doesn't mean a business isn't sellable. It just means there's going to be more things for a buyer to fix post sale. So they're the main things we look at. There are other things as well, depending on the different business models. So if it's a software business, there might be some more technical due diligence. If it's an e-commerce business, we might look at their supply chain. If it's a content business, so it's a blog relying on traffic from Google, we might look at Google Analytics to make sure that their traffic is legitimate, coming from non-paid sources if they're saying they don't have any paid traffic expenses. So there's a huge amount of due diligence that can happen, but it does depend a little bit on the business model. But those are the main buckets. So it's kind of financial due diligence, legal due diligence, operational due diligence, technical due diligence. And then depending on the business model, there may be some other things as well. But they're really the things that we do. I'd say we do like a light version of it to make sure things are legit. And then as an acquirer, it's your job to do a more detailed version of that.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the technical due diligence. I'm sure I would think of it if I was trying to sell a business or whatnot, but using like a third-party plugin or a third-party site to do your selling or this or that could actually come in and affect the purchase, right? So like if say, for example, you're reliant on Instagram to sell your t-shirt, could that potentially prevent someone from wanting to buy a business?
To an extent, I'd say one of the reasons philosophically or fundamentally we reach out to as many buyers as possible is if, again, you quiz 1,000 different buyers, hey, do you want to buy a business that's relying on Instagram? 500 people are going to be like, wow, Instagram's amazing. Yeah, this is a big pro for me. Absolutely. 500 are going to say, no way, Instagram's risky. I don't like Facebook, or I guess they're called Meta now. I don't like Meta. I don't like Mark Zuckerberg. I don't want to buy that business. So to an extent, yes. But the purpose of, I guess, using an M&A firm like FE in the first place is we will reach out to buyers, and those who do not like it, it doesn't matter. We just focus on finding those who do, rather than there's no such business as a business that everyone likes or everyone will agree with. So the trick is not trying to make your business into something that everyone will like. It's just trying to find a buyer who does not care about things that other people do.
Yeah,
I think
there's also, in almost no business are there objectively good and objectively bad things. because people view, or buyers view, opportunities in many different ways. So the business I was using as an example, messy operations, has no processes internally. Again, you survey 1,000 buyers, 500 of them hate it because they're like, wow, this business sucks. It's got no processes. And 500 say, wow, this is a really great opportunity to improve the processes.
Yeah.
The business is exactly the same, but the mindset of buyers, and again, there's no right or wrong. There's a buyer, there's no right or wrong answer. What you're looking for is what you're looking for.
Yeah, but I think that's a great observation, because I think for a lot of people, it might even be if I'm thinking about selling down the road one day, I may not start my sale strictly for one of those reasons, right? Maybe I don't feel like my business looks good enough, or maybe on paper it's not strong enough, or maybe I don't have the processes in place, that kind of thing. Those would all be factors I would think as a small business owner that might actually keep me from putting it up for sale. When in reality, to your point, maybe those are opportunities for somebody else. So I think that that's a really interesting, just sort of, I guess, even as observation as far as sales in general go, right? I mean, it's not about necessarily making sure that your widget applies to, or, appeals to everybody. Rather, it could just be sort of, finding the right buyer. So I think that's a cool way of looking at sales.
Yeah, it's definitely also a mistake I've seen people make in the past, where business owners have been approached by a particular buyer. So the DJ private equity firm reaches out to Mike to buy his new course business that he's just made after our podcast. And they say, oh, Mike, this sucks because you don't have videos about X. And X is, I don't know, classical music, which is kind of irrelevant, but something they want as part of their portfolio. So what a lot of sellers then do is they're like, oh, I spoke to a buyer and the buyer said, no one's going to buy this business unless you're doing X. And then they spend a bunch of time building out X. But what they've actually done is just pivoted their business to be suitable to one particular buyer. They haven't actually really just focused on growing the business, which ultimately will be make it worth more, and ignoring that buyer. But a lot of buyers who will approach privately are very good and very credible at not necessarily pretending, but acting like what they're telling you is going to be relevant to every single buyer. So you can never sell this business unless you have this. Generally speaking, that's never actually true. There's almost no scenario where that statement is true about anything, but buyers can be quite good at doing that. So a lot of sellers do make the mistake of changing their business or pivoting it based on what they've been told from one or two people. You should almost never do that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really good advice. I mean, I can even speak in my own experience, especially when I was younger. I mean, I can't tell you how many little products and stuff we launched on the advice of somebody. Somebody was like, oh, hey, we should do this thing. And it'd be a really good idea. So a lot of people seem to like it. And then we spend all this time, energy, and stuff to do it for it to do nothing. Right. And then meanwhile, that person is nowhere to be found now. And so
yeah, I made the same mistake earlier in my business. We had some quite big clients who were like, oh yeah, hey, you should roll this out. Like, we're a VIP client, we'll buy it. And then you spend a bunch of time rolling out and you have 3 people who are interested. And that other the client who told you about it is like, oh, actually, no, we've gone in a different direction, or we don't have the budget.
Bought it from somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, so we're getting sort of to the end here, but I kind of had derailed our process conversation earlier and focused on due diligence for a minute. I wondered if you'd just take us through the rest of the journey of sort of the sale or acquisition.
Yeah. So we complete our due diligence. So we've already spoken about audit, the other things that go into it, establishing everything's legitimate. We then prepare what we call a prospectus. A prospectus is a long document, usually 20 to 50 pages, telling buyers everything there is to know about the business. And we've put that together based on things we've learned from the seller, questions we've asked them, things they've told us, things they've sent us. There are different words for it, but prospectus is what we call it anyway. And then we go through all the different elements of the business. Once we've prepared that, we go to the seller and say, hey, this is what we put together. Can you confirm it's legitimate and accurate? They'll say yes. Or can you fix this? I don't like this graph. Can you solve it for this graph? We go ahead, do that. And then we go out to buyers. I think I already described the process to one of Mike's questions earlier, but we'll reach out to a range of buyers, some in our network, some outside of our network. Depending on the business, we have slightly different processes, but generally we have a deadline for making offers. And what that deadline is might vary on the size of the business. So if it's a say a small $1 million deal, the deadline might be a week or might be 2 weeks. If it's a $20 million business, the deadline might be a month, because it takes a little bit more time for businesses at that size to kind of be analyzed by a potential buyer. And then I guess our job in that time period, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, is to get as many offers as we can on the business from qualified buyers. So again, to Mike's question earlier, that's not necessarily just the highest bid. That might be the quickest closing time, the shortest transition time. Maybe it's the least money, but the fastest transition, or the most money, but the slowest transition. And then once we've got all of those offers on the table, we work collaboratively with the seller to establish which offer they want to take. Now, generally involve a few rounds of negotiation. So if we get 10 offers, we don't just blindly accept the top offer. We'll probably go back to the top 3 or 4 and say, hey, look, seller likes you guys and your team, but we want you to put in a final offer by, say, next Friday, send it across, and then we're going to make a decision. And then the top 4 of the 10 bidders we have will come through and make a final offer. Then we make a decision. Once we've done that, we then go to the element we were just talking about, which is due diligence. So that's where a buyer essentially starts verifying everything we've already verified and things they might want to know as well. So maybe they're a development agency and they're buying the business for technical reasons. So they might spend more time on technical due diligence. Others might be, say, a private equity firm. They might care more about the financials. So most buyers will do all parts of due diligence, but generally are slightly more focused on particular areas that they care about. Due diligence period varies depending on the size of the business. It could be 3 days for a really small business, 60 days for a slightly larger business. And it's quite common for it to be anywhere in between that as well. As that process is happening, we're generally working with our in-house legal team and the buyer and seller's legal team, if they have one, to negotiate the purchase agreement. So that's really outlining everything that was already discussed at offer stage, putting that into a contract form, and then anything that buyer and seller agree that they want as part of the deal, that all goes in there. And then once we get to the end of the due diligence period, let's say it's a 30-day period, contract gets signed, and then we use generally a third-party escrow service. And escrow is basically a company that will hold the money while the business is transferred. And then once the buyer says, yeah, I've got the business per the contract, the funds get released, the seller gets the money, the buyers get their business, we get paid. And then from there, the deal is done. And it's really just a case from there of the seller providing the buyer with any ongoing training that was part of the deal. So maybe there's 30 days of training or 90 days of training or some other parts of handover that's required. So at a really high level, that's our process start to finish. It can change slightly depending on the size of the deal, but it's pretty consistent what we go through from a process perspective, and we don't really change it.
Yeah. I guess once you have the steps in order and it works, why reinvent the wheel?
We've never changed the steps. We do tweak the steps and we add more to them or take parts away, but the steps have been the same since day one. They've just got, I guess, more sophisticated.
Yeah. And, depending on what's going on, you might have to do something different specific for that business or what.
For sure. Yeah. Like, for example, some businesses might require more technical work up front. Some might require more accounting audit work. It really depends.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of at that time, Thomas. It's been an hour and it doesn't even seem like it. It seems like it's been, 20 minutes. But thank you for making time for us and having this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to echo what Mike said, I really appreciate this information. I think that, the sales process for a lot of people is something that they might do maybe once in a life, for a lot of people. And so having good, reliable partners, people with reputation, like we've discussed so much in this show, I think is really critical. So I'm grateful for companies like you, and I'm grateful for your willingness to just share information with our audience.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thomas, do you want to tell people where they can reach you and possibly work with you if they have a business they want to sell?
Yeah, best thing to do if you want a free valuation, go to our website, feinternational.com. and then you navigate, pick your business model, tell us you want a valuation, and someone in the team will be in touch. And that's very much a manual process. Can't automate a valuation. You have to go through a manual process. So our team will do that. If you want to find me personally, or just I guess the company in general, generally quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn. So you can find me there. You can find FE International there. So maybe if you're not thinking about selling now, or you're not thinking about buying now, we have a huge amount of content we publish either on social media or kind of on our blog or whatever it might be. So if you follow us there, it's a good way to keep up, or just navigate around our website. It should be simple enough to figure out whether you want to buy or you want to sell.
Perfect.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tuned into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.